One of the biggest and most obvious influences of individual differences is our own unique combination of personality characteristics. Some of us are more extroverted, some of us are more anxious, some of us are more responsible, some of us are more irritable and have lower frustration tolerance. And each of these characteristics helps to form who we are as individuals. It helps to form how we think, how we feel, and how we interact with the world. In fact, when we speak about individual differences, we're often speaking inherently about personality, because the study of personality is the study upon the dimensions upon which we differ. Those dimensions have changed and morphed a bit over time, but they actually date back all the way to ancient Greece. Perhaps the first conceptualization was by Hippocrates, who suggested that we may differ in terms of our hotness, coldness, and our moistness, dryness, which was a rudimentary form of personality construction, but somehow related to our own substances in our body, bile and blood and whatnot. After that, Aristotle came up with a conceptualization of personality that is perhaps a little bit closer to today's version. He suggested that people may differ on 4 dimensions: artisticness, intuitiveness, reasoning ability, and sensibility. Those also haven't held true to today, but they are more in line with today's conceptualizations of personality. After that, other conceptualizations came from Freud, who put forward his ideas about the id, the ego, and the superego, which you've all probably learned a little bit about. And then Carl Jung, whose fingerprint remains on today's conceptualizations of personality. Today, you're probably familiar with the Myers-Briggs, which has become popular in the business world and perhaps in the real world, and has become popularized somewhat in the media. But more reliable and more scientifically oriented is a framework for personality that's referred to as the Big Five. The Big Five is made up of 5 personality dimensions, which are believed to be able to explain all sub-components of an individual's personality. Now, those 5 components, put up here, 5 components can be thought of in terms of 2 acronyms, either OCEAN or CANOE. We'll work with OCEAN, and OCEAN stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, 2 of the reasons the Big Five has become so popular is because, 1, it shows considerable ability to predict human behavior across a wide variety of theoretical and real-world situations, and 2, because it has shown a well-established connection to underlying biological systems. And so each of the Big Five traits is believed to be underpinned by a specific neurobiological system in the body. Now, in some of my courses, I go through each of the Big Five traits in considerable detail. For this course, we're going to focus on 2 that are particularly relevant to stress. And so we're going to focus on neuroticism and conscientiousness. So first, neuroticism. Neuroticism is sometimes also referred to as emotional instability, and it's sometimes actually a little easier to explain in terms of its opposite, which is emotional stability. Individuals who are emotionally stable tend to be pretty even-keeled. They don't get riled up too often. They don't necessarily experience super lows in terms of anxiety and sadness. And so the individual who's high in neuroticism is the opposite of this. Their moods and emotions may fluctuate a little bit more. They may experience more lows in terms of anxiety and depression, and they may be a little bit more susceptible to anxiety and mood disorders. Some of that seems to be because they seem to be a bit more attuned to stress and to threat in their environment. I mean, the best example I can give is a personal one. My wife and my stepdaughter are both a little bit spider phobic, and so we'll be sitting there just watching TV. I'm sitting there, I'm watching, I don't notice anything, and all of a sudden both of them are like, "Whoa, spider!" "Whoa, spider!" And it doesn't matter how big or small that spider is. It doesn't matter which corner of the room it's in. Their peripheral vision will just see something moving, and they are like, "Spider!" And so, that happens to be an example that's very specific to a certain phobia. But individuals who are higher in neuroticism tend to show that type of generalized elevation of noticing various forms of stress and threat in their environment. Now, as you might imagine, identifying stress and threat in the environment more often is likely to influence how you feel, what your beliefs about the world are, and how you act in the world. And so individuals who are high in neuroticism may be a little bit more avoidant in their strategies because they expect stress more often. And they may actually use different coping strategies to try to manage their stress. For instance, they actually may resort to self-blame quite often because there is some expectation that stress is around all the time and that they're feeling stressed more often than other people. And so it must have something to do with them. Well, to some extent it does. It has to do with their neuroticism, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with something about them that would require self-blame. And so the individual who's high in neuroticism often benefits very much from an ability to recognize and to change their mindset towards their stressors, to start to see them as challenges instead of threats. We've gone through this before, and so we won't go through it in a great deal of detail again. But individuals who are high in neuroticism often benefit a lot from the distinction between distress and eustress. And so if you happen to be one of those individuals, that definition and that distinction may have resonated with you quite a bit. And so working with an individual who's high in neuroticism may involve really helping to establish an expectation of stress as challenge rather than threat, and a categorization of those stressors in terms of whether they are physical or non-physical, whether they are distress or eustress, and whether they are challenge or threat. The second big 5 factor we're going to talk about is conscientiousness. Now, unlike neuroticism, which can be considered to be a risk factor for high stress, high conscientiousness is actually considered a protective factor for high stress. Individuals who are high in conscientiousness tend to be quite self-disciplined, quite rule-oriented. They make to-do lists and checklists. They plan, they organize, they create goals, they create a schedule and stick to their time management. They persevere. And so, unlike neuroticism, which may be considered a sort of to affect stress in quite a direct way, conscientiousness affects it quite indirectly, but in important ways. Individuals who are highly conscientious may simply not find themselves in as many high-stress situations because they may have done the work and the planning and the organization earlier on, so that high-stress event doesn't actually quite occur. Now, this is an aspect of stress that we don't talk about that often. We talk a lot about moods, we talk a lot about emotions, we talk a lot about appraisals, we talk a lot about body physiology. We don't talk very much about planning and organization and creating goals and schedules and time management. But these are extremely, extremely important. And we find that individuals who are highly conscientious report themselves as lower stress much more often. Part of the reason for this might be because they avoid many of the daily hassles that individuals that are lower in conscientiousness end up having pile up on them more often. And since we've learned that daily hassles can in fact be one of the, if not the most potent predictor of subjective stress levels, being able to reduce that number of daily hassles on a quite daily basis can have really large impacts. And so in this course, we're of course going to start talking about specific coping mechanisms and ways in which we can deal with our stress better. And one of those is going to be to talk about time management and organization. One of the live sessions we're going to have is going to focus specifically on procrastination and is going to try to help you to organize your life in a way that reduces the likelihood that you need to cope with the stress, because sometimes the best offense is a good defense.